As some of you might know, the people in the top tier of my Patreon get to choose a video topic each month for me. And today we have the first one of those. So a big thank you to Miasma for supporting the channel and choosing the topic of Naraku. Miasma also has his own channel, which I will link in the description down below, so please go check him out. With that said, if you guys are excited for the story of Naraku, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more Inuyasha and Yashahime content. You can also support the channel through Patreon, just like Miasma did. And on that note, I would also like to thank my newest patrons, Brian Escobar, Amelia Hellman, and Anel Cruz. With that all being said, let's get into it. The story of Naraku begins with a man named Onigumo. He hired a group of thieves to take the Shikon jewel from Kikyo, only for Inuyasha to interfere. The leader, named Rasetsu, hunted down Onigumo to take revenge for sending his group on a suicide mission. And when he found Onigumo, he blew up the inn that he was inside of before throwing the charred body off of a cliff. Onigumo would be found by the priestess Kikyo, who nursed him back to the point where he was able to speak. The man was wicked, but despite this, he ended up falling in love with Kikyo. Realizing he could never be with her though, he summoned countless demons and had them devour his body in exchange for them giving him a new one, with which he could use to claim Kikyo and the jewel. The countless demons fused together with Onigumo acting as a connector, and thus Naraku was born. His first act in his new body was to corrupt and obtain the Shikon jewel, saying the jewel was most beautiful when tainted with malice. To do this, he would disguise himself as both Inuyasha and Kikyo to fool them into hating each other. He would attack and mortally wound Kikyo, stealing the jewel from her and bringing it back to the village, where he warned everyone that Inuyasha was coming to steal it. When Inuyasha came for the jewel, the villagers attacked him, and the real Kikyo returned to pin him to the sacred tree. Here is where Naraku's plan fell apart. He was expecting Kikyo to make a selfish wish and heal herself with the jewel. However, she instead decided to be cremated with it, taking it with her into the afterlife. And here is the tragedy of Onigumo. Say what you want about him, he was a horrible man, but the idea of selling your soul for a wish, only to be held within a body as it attacks and kills the woman you love. The soul of Onigumo within Naraku began to struggle against the demons. Killing Kikyo was the last thing he wanted after all. However, the demons took steps to effectively seal Onigumo away within himself, with Onigumo perceiving this as being imprisoned in a deep, dark place where he was left to sleep within Naraku's subconscious. For the next 50 years after Kikyo's death, Naraku plotted and waited for the jewel to return. In this time, he cursed a monk named Miyatsu with the wind tunnel to ensure that his bloodline would suffer for eternity. He also tries to kill a young priestess named Hitomiko, who despite her age already rivaled Kikyo in power. However, this attempt ends with him being driven off. If nothing else, these events show us how fearful and spiteful Naraku could be, taking steps for preservation and revenge. Like other Hanyo, Naraku experienced points of weakness, and in this time he would revert to his human form. However, he could choose when this time happened, unlike most others. And honestly, I'm not too sure that human form is exactly accurate here. While this was happening, his body becomes basically just a head attached to countless demon parts, each time reconstructing and experimenting with his body to get rid of the weak and useless parts while keeping the strong ones, giving us the understanding that he was in some way fearful and lacked confidence, constantly removing his own imperfections. Regardless, just as Naraku hoped, eventually the jewel returned and shattered into hundreds of shards, with Inuyasha's group collecting a few of them and Naraku collecting almost all of the remaining shards himself. Interestingly enough, when Naraku discovered that Inuyasha and Miyatsu's grandson Miroku had joined together, not to mention when he learned about Tessaiga, he realized that he likely wouldn't be able to defeat Inuyasha, or at best, he would be greatly injured in the process. Instead, he sought out Sesshomaru and tried to manipulate him into killing his brother, and there is the kind of demon that Naraku tends to be. I'm not sure that he would be considered a coward, but at the very least he is meticulous and calculated. He prefers to work from the shadows and manipulates others to do his dirty work for him, and when he isn't manipulating someone else, he would often send out puppets in his place, sometimes even combining these factors. One of the greatest instances of manipulation comes when he had the demon slayers wiped out. Sango survives and he convinces her to hunt down Inuyasha, pinning the blame on her destroyed village on him. When Sango eventually learns the truth, Naraku takes the steps of reviving her brother Kohaku using a jewel shard. He wipes Kohaku's memory and constantly puts Sango up against him or bribes her with his life. He also holds Kohaku hostage by giving him his memories back in moments of hesitation, flooding him with images of killing his own family, and all of the other horrible things that he's done in Naraku's stead, to the point where Kohaku would beg to forget. This all leads to Naraku being mortally wounded in a fight with Inuyasha and his group where he is pierced by one of Kagome's sacred arrows. He escapes and hides away as he tries to recover, deciding to lock various demons in a mountain where he would have them fight to the death, and the winner would get to absorb all the others into himself, with Naraku then swallowing the demon to gain a body. The revived Kikyo would soon find her way to him, and soon after decides to bring all of Kagome's shards to him. This in the hopes that he would finish gathering the rest of the jewel, and then she could purify both Naraku and the jewel in one moment, which didn't exactly go as planned. With the power of Kagome's shards, Naraku sees his next natural step of evolution, the ability to create incarnations. He essentially went from using puppets and manipulating others to keep himself safe to being able to create his own demons to act in his place. Each one was in some way a reflection of who Naraku was. Kana allowed for Naraku to spy on things through the poison insects at a distance, while also representing the void, the nothingness inside Naraku's heart. Kagura was the wind, and he kept her prisoner by holding onto her heart, which represents his desire to control Onigumo's heart, despite Onigumo only wanting to be free. Goshinki represents the mind games that Naraku would play on others, always being one step ahead, and Jiromaru was Naraku's ruthlessness, while Kageromaru showed us how he could hide behind others and strike only in opportune moments. This could be seen in all of the incarnations in some way or another. The most interesting incarnation thematically though has to be Muso. There's a short period where Naraku chills the fuck out for a bit. During this time, he continuously checks in on Kikyo, claiming to just be keeping an eye on her, but Kikyo explains it as Onigumo's heart showing through. While watching through Kana's mirror, he sees Inuyasha and Kikyo together, and in a fit of jealousy, he tries to cut the skin off of his own back using a sword, likely to try and remove the spider burn, which was a reminder of his humanity. Around this time, the soul of Onigumo begins to fight for freedom within Naraku much stronger than before, and as a result, Naraku decides to grant his wish, quite literally expelling the human heart of Onigumo from within himself, only to realize that this is a part of him which is incredibly important in keeping his body together, seeing himself begin to transform into another demon and barely able to resist it, opting to reabsorb Muso as a result. Soon after this, Naraku is beginning to feel some pressure. He not only has Inuyasha's group after him, but also Sesshomaru. As a result, he kidnaps Rin and lures Sesshomaru out in an attempt to absorb him. Inuyasha shows up as Sesshomaru is surrounded by Naraku's flesh and breaks through Naraku's barrier with a red Tessaiga, leaving Naraku looking genuinely afraid for a moment. Together, Inuyasha and Sesshomaru manage to overcome Naraku and he is forced to flee, using Rin as bait to stop Sesshomaru and ensuring that he can get away, still showing us that he is always prepared, even when he's surprised by something like the red Tessaiga. That said, Naraku is insanely injured at this point and hides in Mount Hakure, having Hakushin create a powerful holy barrier around the mountain to conceal his presence and locking out any demonic enemies or even resurrected people like Kikyo. Prior to him completing reconstruction, Naraku also resurrected the Band of Seven to keep his opponents preoccupied. Kikyo would eventually convince Hakushin to drop the barrier, allowing everyone inside the mountain and forcing Naraku to make his move. He fuses with the mountain for the moment and traps his enemies inside, also separating himself from his heart through the incarnation of the infant. This made Naraku effectively immortal unless the infant was destroyed. As such, he sends Kagura off with the infant and at the same time manages to steal Kagome's shards, leaving him with a nearly completed jewel and a new, much more powerful body. He says that giving his opponents a shared grave would be the last mercy that he would give them before beginning to destroy the mountain. At this point, he is no longer burdened by Onigumo's heart, and his higher demonic power begins to make him more arrogant. He still tries to hide behind others, but he's much more likely to get his own hands dirty. Upon leaving the mountain, he's confronted by Kikyo and manages to wound her, knocking her off the mountain and into a river of miasma down below, showing he really is free of Onigumo's influence, as he had discarded Onigumo in the mountain. Then Sesshomaru shows up and obliterates him with Tokijin, only for Naraku to reveal that he's still fine, saying he will never die as he makes his escape. At this point, there are only 4 shards left. Kohaku has 1, Koga has 2, and 1 is at the border between the afterlife and the land of the living. Naraku puts Kagura and the infant in charge of finding the last one, eventually having Hakudoshi involved in this as well. This would end up being fairly fruitless, and Naraku would be forced to find Princess Abby and her mother Teke, demons originating from hell who he hoped could help him find an entrance. Their reward for helping him was Naraku's betrayal, killing Princess Abby and decapitating Teke, with her blood opening a path to the borderland for both Naraku and Inuyasha's group. Naraku naturally manages to get Hosenki's shard, but this whole instance just shows a new level of brutality that Naraku is capable of. He's always been willing to deceive or fool his enemies, but the way he went back on Princess Abby was the most direct and savage thing we've seen so far. Upon returning to the world of the living, he learns that Kikyo survived and sends Hakudoshi to kill her. However, he fails, and Naraku decides to seek out the Knowing Stone so that he can give it to the infant and make it impossible for anyone to find him. Soon after, we see Hakudoshi planning a rebellion against Naraku, using Kagura and Moriomaru. Hakudoshi then finds himself in a fight, boasting about how he is the most powerful there is, and how no one is able to stop him, leading Naraku to disable his barrier and allowing him to be absorbed by the wind tunnel. Then Naraku seeks out Kagura and returns her heart, only to stab her with his tendrils and fill her with miasma, leading to her death shortly after. Moriomaru too, along with the infant inside of him, would challenge Naraku and be absorbed by him as well. Naraku might have always been known for betrayal, but the moment his incarnations showed the same traits, he systematically annihilated them. However, now he had lost all of his pawns, and as such, he created Byakuya to replace them. In reabsorbing the infant, Naraku was no longer invulnerable. But having gained Moriomaru and an almost completed Shikon jewel, he was at this point his most confident. He was able to fight nearly any enemy on even footing. He returned to Hakure to reabsorb Onigumo in an attempt to avoid being purified by Kikyo. At this point, Naraku began being able to make spiderwebs which could grasp anyone with corruption in their heart, controlling corpses, and even trapping spirits. These webs would eventually capture Kikyo and begin to corrupt her, with Naraku flooding her with more and more miasma, and guaranteeing that his most feared enemy would soon be gone, demonstrating to us that the demon Naraku had finally overcome his human heart. This doesn't go perfectly as Kagome gets her sacred bow, but the important thing in regards to Naraku is that at this point he is willing and able to kill Kikyo, and when it seems like that goal wouldn't happen, he had no problem showing up himself to ensure that she would die, no longer leaving anything to chance. And here is where we see Naraku taking the final steps to clear out his enemies, sending Kana after them and having her summon the Mirror Demon, essentially sacrificing herself in keeping it alive. And when the fight was coming to an end, Naraku crushes her heart in his hand to make both her and her Mirror Demon explode, trying to take Inuyasha's group with her into the afterlife. He wondered for a moment if Kana would be upset for not being able to complete her mission, and remembered that she was simply the Void, and had no feelings for herself. It was a weird moment of brutality, followed by almost sympathy, and then indifference. Of course, he was unaware that Kana had made her first free choice to assist Kagome in telling her about the speck of light in the jewel, which could be used to kill Naraku. He quickly turned his attention to Kohaku. Kikyo's light in his shard was keeping Naraku from being able to remove it himself, so he tried to simply decapitate him. When this fails, he tries to control Kohaku and have him cut his own head. Luckily, Sango arrives in time to protect him and scares off Naraku using her upgraded Hiraikotsu, with Naraku later using Magatsuhi to corrupt Kohaku's shard and possess Kohaku. This too failed, and Naraku would end up using Kagome as a hostage to get to Kohaku. This didn't exactly go smoothly, but Naraku managed to gain the shard while Kikyo's light went to Kohaku to save his life. We get this super interesting scene where Byakuya asks Naraku what he would do with the jewel now, and Naraku told him that he had no real plans and wondered what he would do once all of his enemies were gone. The jewel now fully corrupted, Naraku began his final transformation. However, as Magatsuhi was defeated, a sliver of light returned to the jewel, and Naraku would create traps and illusions to force Inuyasha's group to try and do things which would complete the corruption once again. All of these, however, failed. When the group finally reaches Naraku, Inuyasha tries to kill him with the Meido, but Naraku fuses with the jewel and insisted that even if he died, the jewel would not, confusing Kagome as it meant that Naraku had no plans for himself and was instead putting the jewel first. We are really being led towards the idea that Naraku doesn't seem to know why he wants the jewel at this point, which is a really interesting development. All of his work and no end goal. Kagome questions what his true wish was, saying it must have involved relationships as his schemes always involved tearing people apart. Naraku is shocked and begins to think about this, and meanwhile the combined forces of Inuyasha's Meido and Sesshomaru's Boxsaiga begin wearing down on his body as he starts to fall apart. Byakuya manages to cut Kagome with a sample of the Meido, and even backed into a corner like this, Naraku laughs and says that everything will end in a battle of souls. In this position, Naraku has no options but to feed his soul to the jewel to gain a more powerful form that could last long enough to reach Kaede's village and erase it from the map. Sesshomaru slices through Naraku with Boxsaiga one more time. Inuyasha uses the Meido to send his body to hell, and Kagome would strike the jewel with the sacred arrow. As the arrow flew through the air towards the jewel, Naraku thinks to himself that the jewel really didn't grant the one wish he had always wanted, Kikyo's love, and he lamented that he wouldn't be going to the same afterlife that she was. As Naraku begins fading, his spirit hovers above the Bone Eater's well and explains that he has made a new wish on the jewel, and that his death would make that wish a reality. His spirit disappears and a stolen Mado swallows Kagome as the well vanishes. Here we kind of find out why Naraku was so dead set on gaining the jewel. It wasn't to complete his own wish. Kikyo wasn't around when the jewel was rediscovered, and while he was trying to gather the jewel, he was actively trying to kill her after all. We learn that the wish that Naraku had made was the wish of the jewel itself, that Kagome and Naraku would replace Midoriko and the demon of the jewel and be locked in battle for eternity. For this to happen, Kagome would need to make a selfish wish on the jewel. However, Inuyasha uses the Mado to slice through the jewel's light, destroying the jewel forever and purifying Naraku in the process. In the anime, Naraku even smiles and wonders if this is what peace feels like. I think Onigumo and Naraku are some of the most interesting characters in the series, while also being some of the most tragic. Yes, Onigumo is kind of a bastard, but he was a man who made a wish and sold his soul only to be trapped in a body for over 50 years that acted against everything he wanted, even actively killing the woman that he loved and sold his soul to be with. And when we see Naraku, a demon who was formed through greed and trickery, he would spend his entire existence being manipulated by the jewel and hiding or plotting to keep himself safe. He was a coward and a manipulator who was just a puppet himself. He betrayed everyone he came across, even Onigumo, and in the end, after 50 years of living in fear, he was killed with nothing to show for it. As terrible as he was, it's kind of tragic to think about, but it's what makes him such a great villain. He's the definition of a Machiavellian character, and the way that he relied on manipulation more so than brute strength was just something that put him in a league of his own, especially in the period where Inuyasha was coming out. But what do you guys think of Naraku, and did you enjoy this telling of his story? Let me know in the comments down below. A big thank you once again to Miasma for supporting the channel and recommending this video. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Inuyasha and Yashahime content. If you want to support the channel yourself, you can also check out the Patreon in the description. A big thank you to our Dai Yokai, Miasma, our Yokai, Lucifina Akuma, and our Hanyo, Michael Greco, Jasmine Morales, Negakitty, and Jupiter Girl 125. As well as a thank you to our newest patrons, Anel Cruz, Amelia Hellman, and Brian Escobar. That being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed this video, and until next time, remember to stay excellent.